Welcome to Organizing the Research Process, part of the Biodefense capstone course. Today we're talking about how to organize and manage your research project. When most of us tackle a project this big, there are a bunch of challenges that, even for people who've been in the business a long time, are sometimes difficult to deal with. And so today I'm going to share with you some thoughts and some tools about how to manage the research process that I hope you'll find useful for the capstone project and potentially for other projects in your life. And if you're like me, you face at least three really central challenges to finishing a project in a way that makes you happy. And the first big one is finishing on time, especially when you've got so many other things in your life and you only have so much energy to put towards any one project. It can sometimes be challenging to finish each project in the time span that you're hoping to finish it. So that's one big challenge. And relatedly, fitting your research into your week every week can be challenging. We're all busy. We all have other things competing for our time. Even academics whose jobs are purportedly to do research and writing, that's the last thing anyone wants me to be doing. I get dragged in 16 directions, and so I have to fight, just like you do, to find time to sit alone and read and write. And I imagine for most of you who have full-time jobs that are not professor jobs, it's even harder for you. So that's a really critical challenge that you need to overcome. And obviously, most of you have overcome this over time in your academic career. So in some ways, I'm preaching to the choir here. And then the last thing is staying motivated and managing stress through what can be a very difficult time, especially as we finish our academic careers and we're really raring to get out of here. So let's just talk about a few of these things and how you might deal with them. The first thing is to use a strategy that I'll call project mapping, or project management, I guess you could call it, for lack of fancier words, to help you finish on time. So to do this, you start with your ultimate goal, of course, and the goal is to finish your final draft by May 9, by midnight. And to do that then, to finish by May 9, we need to work backwards and establish what I would call process deadlines. So if you think of the whole thing as involving a whole bunch of steps, you basically want to figure out what the key steps are that you need to finish in order to finish the whole thing and establish deadlines for each of those. So I'm going to write the proposal by this time. I'm going to write the rough draft by this time, and so on and so forth. The trick to make this strategy work is to be able to break your project into manageable chunks or phases. If you have too few phases, it's just like telling yourself, well, the paper's due May 9th. And frankly, that's intimidating and counterproductive because it's too scary to contemplate that whole big thing all in one gulp. You don't write a paper. You write sentences. So, but if you said to yourself, I have to write 50,000 sentences, you'd also freak out. So you need to break it into just the right number of chunks that it helps you organize your thinking without freaking you out. We'll say a little bit more on the next slide about what that number might look like. But at any rate, you're going to break the project into manageable chunks, establish a deadline for each of those chunks to get done, and then for each of those phases, you're going to set a set of concrete tasks and goals that will help you complete each of the phases. So let's now look at what a project map might look like. And this is just a suggestion for the term. I don't suggest you have to use this, of course. This is just how I would probably do it if it were me. I do something similar when I write journal articles because, in fact, I break the whole year up into 3 periods: summer, spring, and fall, because those are the 3 semesters of the year. So I follow very much a how to write your journal article in 12 weeks kind of a lifestyle. And so I'm always doing this. And so each term I actually layer, a couple of different projects and these phases, so they're kind of competing for my attention. But if I don't organize, it gets worse. So this is a really good idea for one paper. It's even better if you have more than one thing going on. So anyways, your first phase, I would suggest, would be the proposal writing phase. And that will take you from whenever you start, say, after you woke up from your New Year's hangover on January 5th, through February 8th, when your draft proposal is due. And the key tasks there, of course, would be to identify your topic, to read the literature, to hone your research question, to really nail that, and to obviously write the proposal. And you have a hard deadline for that phase, and that's going to be that February 8th due date. Then you have a 2-week period where you're in proposal revision land. You're going to owe a revised version of your proposal by February 22. And so during that phase, you're going to continue reading, honing that research question. You're going to respond to your writing partner's feedback and bake that into a revised proposal by the 22nd. Then once you've kind of got final buy-off on your proposal, you will enter the meat of the first chunk of meat of the project, which is the data collection and analysis, and that will run you through from February 8th through March 27th. Now you notice that that date overlaps with the previous one. Now various of you will have different amounts of revision to do, and so some of you, you may spend the whole 2 weeks from the 8th to the 22nd focused entirely on revisions, and you may do no data collection. Others of you may be more advanced because you've already been working on something, so your proposal is pretty airtight, and so you'll spend most of that February 8th through 22nd period jumping right into data collection. So there's a little bit of wiggle there. But at any rate, this is your next major phase where you're going to collect data. And of course, by data, I mean whatever kind of data it is. You're going to finish up reading whatever literature you need to read here. You're going to carry out this data collection. You're going to go do your surveys, join the cult. You're going to read the history and start taking notes on the case studies, whatever your data might be. You're going to analyze that data, and then you'll be ready to start writing your rough draft in the next phase. So the next phase, which is your rough draft phase, will go from March 28th through April 6th. Now, this is, again, a matter of preference here. I've sketched out basically a week for you to write a rough draft in this version of a project map. Everyone works a little differently. I tend to find that for me, it's easier to do a lot of data collection and thinking and note-taking and then write a rough draft relatively quickly, just all in one go. Other people like to write rough drafts over a longer period of time. So, either is, of course, fine. My only argument is that you should bake it into a map so that you are comfortable with when you're doing it and when it's going to be done. And so your rough draft will be done April 6th by 10 p.m. That's the hard deadline in the syllabus. And then you'll enter the final draft phase where you will get feedback, you will then revise, you will format according to your journal requirements, you'll beautify, you'll finish things up, whatever issues arise, you will manage and handle. And then you'll be done May 9 by midnight. And so that's how the project map works. And it has a lot of benefits. Number one, it ensures that you're going to finish on time because you've mapped out everything there is to do, and it will all be done according to the requirements of the project by that deadline, assuming you do everything on the map. And the nice thing there is that unlike a plan that you just say, oh, I'll finish by May 9th, this doesn't allow for very much magic thinking, as I call it, right? This really puts you, it's almost like a contract with yourself where you know that what you have to do now. You can't kind of elide through, well, there's kind of be this magic part where a draft emerges, but I'm not really sure, right? This way you know exactly when you're going to do everything. This lets you see the whole project at a glance. It's a very good way of seeing, where am I in the project? Later I'll talk a little bit about how I think this is a motivation support tool as well, because as you see yourself working your way through it, it's very, very motivating. And I think it also helps, as I said, think about your life planning, because if you see the period March 28th through April 6th on your capstone map and you realize, you know what, I'm out of the country March 28th through April 6th, this is a planning tool that's going to allow you to identify those time conflicts and manage them however you need to. Whereas if you don't write it down, you may not catch that and you may end up in a squeeze later in the semester, which you don't want. Okay, so that's the project map. Fairly straightforward, but a great tool. The second thing is then once you have your map of, this phase I'm going to do these following things, well, then you need to, what I do is I then need to use a weekly planning tool to figure out exactly when during what days I'm going to do this. And I would recommend that you actually use Excel or use a calendar, either print out or digital, however you best work, to really sit down with actual dates on the actual calendar. And you can map out the entire term right now as to when your best guess is for when exactly you're going to do everything. And as you get good at this, and maybe you're already at the point where you're pretty good at this sort of thing, you get a better sense of how long different things are going to take you, and you can start to get pretty good at estimating exactly how many days or hours certain things are going to take you, and that can be very handy. But at any rate, this rather confusing and colorful chart is sort of a close estimate of one of my, what I used to call ideal weeks from some years ago, where when I had another job, and the basic idea was for me to try to figure out when during the week I was actually going to be focused on doing my research as opposed to doing other things, because I had a range of other things to do, teaching, some administration to do, and so on. And so I had to figure out, I have 3 kids, 2 dogs, a wife, that kind of jazz. So when was I actually going to get tenure? So this is when I started using this tool. And so here you can see I've got commute every day, Monday through Friday. I've got what I call buffer, which is this, I think, an important concept. Again, when you sit down at your desk, you typically don't start working right away, do you? So if you're planning out your day and you assume, okay, I'll get to work at 8:45 and I'll begin work at 8:46 on my paper, and I'll work for an hour and a quarter till a meeting at 10 o'clock. I'm guessing that you're lying, because no one sits down at 8:46 and starts working right away. What do you do first? You check email, you check Facebook, you check whatever, you read the news. These are all things that you must and will, of course, do, but you need to not fool yourself into thinking you're actually using that time for research. So I just put it on my calendar. I call it buffer. I know I'm going to check my email, I'm going to check my sites, do all that stuff. I plant it in there so that hey, if I do some research or productive work during that time, that's a bonus, but I don't plan on it. So then you can see where I've snuck in research during this week, where I had to do class prep. For the sake of carving out longer periods of time for research, I squished all my administrivia that semester into one big long day where I just focused all on that. And that was the best way for me to get stuff done, so that I could have a couple longer days where I really didn't have to come into the office or break stride to do other things. And just a few thoughts, and then you can see Saturday and Sunday writing as opposed to research. So for me here, by research I meant read things, maybe do data analysis and so on. But writing for me is a different task from reading, and I need to be fresh. I need to be not bothered. I need to be alone. And so for me, hiding from everyone Saturday and Sunday morning was the easiest way to do that. So again, this is a very straightforward tool, but let me just explain why this is such a useful tool, at least from my perspective. The first reason is that for me, I sort of have ADD. I'm easily distracted. So if I don't sit down and put on a calendar when exactly I'm going to sit down and read, or make myself read, or make myself write, I can find 100 other things to do that are probably more interesting at any given moment than sitting down and opening a book that I meant to get to, or what have you, popping open Stata to do some more data analysis. So I like starting new things more than I like finishing old things. I'm probably not alone in that. So I have to put things on the calendar, or otherwise I can let a whole week go by without getting to what I was thinking I was going to get done. Right? This is another way to help crush the magic thinking from your schedule. Hey, I'll get it done someday. Well, exactly when were you planning on getting it done? Oh, well, let me see. Right? And so, because the first thing you're going to do when you populate this is put all the stuff you have to do that isn't research and writing on there, right? Your job, your significant other, you're walking the dogs, you're taking the kids to work, whatever. So you're going to see how much time you actually have. It's a real good reality check. It's going to help you identify how much time you do have to put towards this project. It's going to also help you make deals with others, right? You're going to figure out what times you are going to need, and you're going to have to go beg those people for the time and space to do it. It's another way you're going to ensure that you're going to finish on time, obviously. And here's one thing I don't think people always appreciate. It's also a great de-stressification tool, because you see the boxes where it says relax? Those are the times when I'm not working on this paper, or anything else for that matter. And when it says class prep, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not supposed to be doing my research during class prep or admin, right? I can tell you this from personal experience and from the discussions with many zillions of people who are in the academic world. It's very easy to let a big research project take over your whole life and to be thinking about it all the time. And while that may be sort of a pandemic within the academic community, it's not necessary, and it's not healthy, because it just makes you stressed out. And frankly, you don't do very good quality thinking when you're stressed out and when you're trying to do 2 things at once. So what this map does is it says, look, if I follow this plan, I will finish on time with a high quality project. So if I'm following this plan, and it says do research on Thursday and Friday from this time to that time, and it says do something else on Tuesday, I don't need to think about that research on Tuesday. I have permission to think about whatever Tuesday is supposed to be about. And then when it says green, it says research, then I do research. So when I go home, I don't worry about it. When it's a weekend and it's afternoon, I don't worry about it, right? So this is a really important psychological tool, I think, for everybody. Okay, so, and that leads to kind of the last slide here, which is how to stay motivated and manage stress throughout a long process, especially for you who are reaching the end of an academic career. Maybe you're running out of steam for this whole school thing. Maybe you're a person who feels some anxiety about finishing a big capstone independent project like this, and so on. All of that, very normal. You're not alone. We've all felt it. But here's just some thoughts about how to stay motivated and to manage stress. The first thing is to stay organized. It's actually the first and last thing. If you use these tools, if you project map and you follow your weekly plans, then by hitting your deadlines, you're going to start giving yourself confidence that your process works, and that's going to give you great confidence, and it's going to reduce your stress. And as you hit your deadlines, I suggest that you celebrate milestones, right? Give yourself a pat on the back, buy yourself a beer, whatever it is you do, to tell yourself, hey, I'm doing a good job. Second thing, exercise and get plenty of sleep. Everybody tells you this. I'm no different. I'm going to tell you it too. It turns out they've actually been doing research lately that shows that thinking hard is tiring. I think we kind of all knew this who do this for a living, but a lot of times I get razzed for having a job where it doesn't look like I do anything, and why should you be tired at the end of the day? Well, it turns out that it's exhausting to exert willpower, and willpower is what it takes to sit and read and read and read and do this kind of analysis that actually your brain starts smoking and coming out your ears, right? So you need to get a lot of sleep. If you want your brain at high power to do this stuff, you need to get some sleep. Third thing, talk about your project with other people. And I mean this in two ways. A lot of times we get bored of our topics. We start thinking they're unimportant because we're going around and around like a hamster with these topics until we've just beat all the fun out of them at a certain point. I mean, people finish their dissertations and their master's theses or their master's papers, and they're like, you know what, if I get one more question about this, I will just blow my top. I'm so sick and tired of it. But a lot of times the reason for that is that we're spending all this time with ourselves. Instead, if you talk to a coworker or someone else who's not in the business, and they say, hey, what are you sneaking off and spending all your time doing over there? What is that? And if you tell them about your project, guess what? If you've picked an interesting and important topic, the way I have suggested and the way I know you're going to, other people are going to be interested in what you're doing. And you will see the interestingness in their eyes, and that will motivate you. You'll be reminded why you're working on something important and interesting, and it will reinvigorate you. I can guarantee this. So don't be afraid to talk about how geeky you are. Share with other people what you're doing. And the second way I mean this is that it really helps to talk to your writing partner. Email with them about your problems. Email about your obstacles you're facing. Brainstorm with each other how to overcome these challenges. Talk about how you're having trouble squeezing in this and that and the other thing. Because commiserating will help a lot. I say this also as a person who's gone through this process and used this strategy. And then the last bit is to get your stuff organized. And here I mean something a little bit different. I don't just mean the project. I mean more generally. And this may be irrelevant to some of you. For me, I happen to have been, by birth, evidently, a person extremely disinterested in organization at a fundamental level. I didn't carry a day planner or even look at one until I was about 30. And that was a mistake, as it turns out. I was very disorganized, and that was not conducive to either finishing things on time or to managing stress. It turns out that the more organized you are in general, the easier things are to get done, and the less stress you have overall. So I have become, over the last 20 years, kind of a organizational, healthy habits of productive people kind of slappy, and so if you're into those sorts of things, there are a bunch of books that I'll post links to on the site that you could look at, and I'm thinking about things like as fundamental as Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which really is a beautiful book and not just about getting a project done. It's not about that at all. It's really deeper than that, but I found it very useful for getting organized at a sort of a molecular level. And then at a some more day-to-day practical level, I'm a big fan of David Allen and his book Getting Things Done, which is a relentlessly practical guide to being organized in terms of like pieces of paper in your life and what it is you're doing, and having a to-do list that makes sense and actually helps you get things done. So I use a number of his strategies and find them very useful, and I'm positive that I am a less stressed out person because I have some of those things under my belt. On the academic side, I'm a big fan of a couple of other books that are on the recommended list, but aren't required. But Joan Bolker's book, Writing Your Dissertation in 15 Minutes a Day, it's written for grad students. It's not just for people writing a dissertation, although that's kind of the genesis of it. But it's great for people who are maybe worried about the writing process. It's very helpful. And on that note, so is Howard Becker's book, Writing for Social Scientists. It's a book, or Writing for the Social Sciences. It's a really fun book to read. It reminds you that everyone has had all the problems you've had, and has a lot of neat thoughts about how to write better. And by getting better at writing, it's easier and less stressful. And then in terms of your writing habits, when you do it during the day, and how you squeeze in time, and how you plan it, and so on. My favorite book, it's a very small book called The Clockwork Muse by a fellow named Eviatar Zerubbabel, who wins the prize for the coolest name. And he's a very prolific sociologist, and he, as the name suggests, says, look, writing, sometimes we think of writing as you have to sit around and wait for the muse to strike, and you shouldn't write unless you feel, some spiritual motivation and so on. And he says, that's nonsense. Good writers write like a German railroad all the time in an organized way. But he has these really interesting points that he makes about great writers. And by great writers, he's looking at great literary writers and other people. And it turns out that most of them don't work in terms of writing. Most of them don't write for more than a couple hours a day. But that they've all figured out when the best time for them to write is. And so as you're building your ideal week, or your weekly plans, which of course you're going to have to customize, and probably they'll change from week to week because your weeks will change. But one of the things you need to keep in mind is, when are you best at what kind of task? And I have very different times during the day when I'm good at different things. So I'm best at writing either in the morning or after I swim in the late afternoon. If I swim sort of mid-afternoon, late afternoon, like 3 o'clock, I get out of the pool, I get back to my office around 4:30. I could, like, that next hour and a half is some of the best, does something in my brain, some of the best writing I ever do. Whereas if it's late at night, I cannot write. If it's, sort of mid to morning to early afternoon, I'm starting to get hungry or crabby or something like that after being at the office. And I'm much better at reading at those periods than I'm at writing. So when I structure my week, I have to take that into account. And so Eviatar Zerubbabel has a really neat sort of discussion of that process and how to figure out how to do that. And once you know about yourself, in those things, and you start to kind of keep track of your writing process and how fast it goes and different things, you actually can get really good, the way he is, really good at figuring out exactly when you're able to finish something. So I think, just those few things, the idea of getting organized at a more fundamental level can be very helpful. Okay, I hope this helped. I look forward to talking with you guys about these things on the discussion board, and I wish you all the best in getting organized in your research for this term.